Holy hell, it's been a while since the last update on KUSOMEGA, and that's because of the fact that I am doing a physical release of the book 1 and 2, and I was going to do a Kickstarter for it. Instead, I'm just going to pay for it out of pocket. If you're an artist who has done work for the book 1 and 2 release, I will be contacting you, sending you the money. Send me an email, because that way I'll get to you even quicker. So I don't have to dig through all the emails of all the people who have said stuff to me months ago. But yeah, I've decided to just front the cost of the book because Kickstarter has a way of inducing project bloat. And it's because I already know that this book is going to be successful. I already know that it would be able to have a successful Kickstarter run. And so it becomes extremely tempting to just say, well, if I got all the money up front, then I could go crazy with it. I can have all these different types of release. I can have all these stretch goals, all these extra plans. But all that does is make it so actually planning the Kickstarter and making sure you can do all those things takes that much longer. And ultimately, I just want this book out. I want the book to exist. I want there to be physical copies. I want people to be able to purchase it because I want to be able to continue the series, move on, and complete it. I already have several other book series that I want to move on with after this is done. KUSOMEGA is planned from, as soon as I finished the first volume, I planned out the rest of it. It's a 4-book series. The whole idea is already there, so it's just a matter of realizing it. The only thing that's held me up is that I want to do this Kickstarter. I wanted to do this Kickstarter. Now I'm thinking, okay, fuck that. Let's strip it down, just pay all the artists, get the book made, sell it, and then once the book has already been successful, then I can redeposit its proceedings into creating further expansion on the series, as is meant to be done. I really think that Kickstarter causes people to think that because they are going around the studio system, they are allowed to do something riskier. But realistically, your audience is also producers who also have expectations of you being able to meet your stuff, and they are going to be even less understanding of how it actually is to get something made than, a professional producer who is, who would refuse you because of the fact that your plan is not good. Whereas the audience will not know if your plan is good or not because they don't know enough, You need to have a certain level of overwhelming confidence. And again, I am very confident that KUSOMEGA, book 1+2, the physical edition, will sell. But the question is, can I actually go through with a plan of creating all this extra shit in order to fill out, all these Kickstarter backer rewards just for the sake of fronting more money because it seems less risky, when realistically it's more risky because I'm inviting more risk into the project on the end of adding things to it. So yeah, that's my logic essentially for why I'm just going to front the cost myself, get this thing out as fast as possible, not wait around for a Kickstarter, get it for sale. Because the physical release has been trapped in this pre-planning phase for so long, it's now been 6 months since Volume 2 of the light novel came out. I wrote the first section of Volume 3 way back around when Volume 2 came out. And I have gone over it. It's been edited. I consider it a complete first section of the book. So I figured I wanted to go ahead and pre-release this at some point as part of the hype cycle for Volume 1 and 2 releasing. Originally, I was going to do it as a launch for the Kickstarter because of the fact that I really want to introduce the new characters who are in this section to the world. I want you to know where I'm sort of at with the story as I go into planning the next stages of it. And I also want to be able to, after Volume 1+2 comes out, to get Volume 3 finished. Basically, as soon as Volume 1+2 has shipped out to people, I want to release Volume 3, or around that same time, so that, I don't want Volume 3 to come out and then kind of spoil, the experience of reading books 1+2, especially if you read it as a physical for the first time, or, if you want to have the full experience of it before the story moves on. But I do want to move the story forward just a touch before we get there. to sort of get you excited about where the series is planning to go. Basically, get you in the mindset that it's worth buying Volume 1 plus 2 so that you will be participating in this story that is moving in the direction of where, Volume 3 is going, I guess. We'll say it's to abate the concern that you'll be purchasing a book in a series that might just go to shit immediately afterwards or go in a direction you're not happy with, which it might very well do in this preview chapter, but you're going to find that out right now. By the way, if you're enjoying KUSOMEGA, I highly recommend checking out KUSOMEGA.com, the official website of the story, because not only can you, re-listen to it here, but there are also extra canonical stories, including one of the comics that will be in the published volume when it's complete, a couple of comics I drew introducing Daidoji and Libeli. I actually drew these before writing Book 3. It might make more sense to read them after listening to the rest of this preview, as you'll understand the relevance of these characters to the actual story. But this was how I conceptualized them. There's the fan art page, which is absolutely massive. Mostly I have just been embedding people's tweets that use the hashtag KUSOMEGA on the site. That way it links directly back to you. Several of these are artists these are images that will be in actually the published volume. People who decided to just show their work on Twitter ahead of time. And if you have any fan art that I haven't posted here, I know there are some people who drew things that I have not put up yet because I have not updated this since February 27th. But I will probably go through and try to find all the stuff that I haven't posted yet. But if you want something posted here on the site, then go ahead and just send it to me in whatever way. If you don't want to use Twitter, if you don't want it to just link through to you that way, let me know. I can post it up by some other means. But yeah, so there's the fan art section. There's also the blog. This became a video, of course. And an analysis section where anybody who has done any kind of reviews or analysis of the story, those are on this page as well. So, check that out if you want to dive deeper into the rabbit hole of people talking about this series. And if you want to participate, use the hashtag KUSOMEGA and your stuff will show up in the hashtag. So if you don't remember how Volume 2 ended, because it has been a while, I will refresh you as this picks up immediately. Takuma and Soraya had networked their consciousnesses together and become a Beowulf cluster. And through this, they had the processing power to deflect Akita when he appears in the air with swinging a sword down at Takuma's head, and Takuma catches the blade, indicating, at least he's capable of defending himself there at the end of Volume 2. So this is where we pick up in our Volume 3 preview. Chapter 1, Akita versus Everyone. I snap Akita's katana in half. Within the same nanosecond, Soraya swings an uppercut, twisting around my left side and up through my arms, pounding Akita's chin with railgun force. Faster than sight, he reaches 80 meters, the instant crack through the roof and several tree branches thunderously resounding. Just as quickly, we jump after him, but he whips himself around and readies an attack, which is interrupted when a foot crashes into his skull, Aether simultaneously appearing and striking. Akita slams into the planet with enough force to carve a 40-meter tunnel with his body, dust billowing heavenward in its wake. Knowing all three of us are hurtling toward him, he immediately emits a massive spherical barrier pulse, reversing our momentum with a pink wave of energy. Each of us backflips to cancel that momentum and lands gently, just out of sight of the enemy and hesitant to attack. I learn, importantly, that he is slower than light, as I see him from far enough away to duck under his kick and punch him in the balls. "Ugh!" he grunts, clutching his groin as his body launches once more, rolling like a wheel off into the atmosphere. Using the processing power of our mental link, Soraya calculates Akita's velocity and starts working towards a predictive arc of where he'll end up, planning to teleport him straight into the heart of a volcano. But even spinning madly and fighting through the pain of his crushed nuts, Akita has enough concentration to notice Soraya staring at him and teleports himself off. "He could have gone anywhere," Soraya speaks into my mind. "I'm sorry for making him spin," I respond. "It was worth it," Aether chimes in. With a leap, she and I rejoin Soraya at the Beastman Temple. "Well," I say out loud, "this feels weird as shit." Chapter 2, Aether's Will. "It remains more efficient to maintain our mental link," Soraya says, seemingly reluctant to return to regular speech. It's hard for me to hang on to my individuality when I've got so much of your info charging into my mind, I respond. I have no trouble with either of you, Aether says, and then speaks into our minds. I am moved that you've come to understand my power so well. There's an inexplicable warmth in feeling her presence in my mind, something like how I'd imagine her embrace. Thinking with you is too relaxing, I say. I just need time to process the relationship of this knowledge to myself. Make it quick, Soraya snaps. Akira is psychic. He understood everything we were doing just as quickly as we understood him. Not quite, Aether speaks into our minds. Sorry, she then says aloud. It's fine, I signal back. Let's resolve our plan first. Soraya's eyes flash white as she conjures signal magic in combination with her psychic powers to give us a holistic feeling of her perspective. While each of us individually is roughly equal in strength to Akira now, we can only become that powerful when forming a Beowulf cluster. There are 3 of us currently with the ability to do it, but it is unknown if even with our powers combined we could outright kill Akira, since he survived all 3 of us going at him full force. Things might be different if we went in with a sneak attack. This thought seems to be the effect of my perspective. But there's almost no chance we'll ever be able to find him if we give chase. Better to stay in one place and simply remain more powerful than him. The warm feeling washes over me again. Aether influences the train of thought now. In this situation, where the only known way for either side to improve is through increased processing power via clustered brains, both sides have no choice but to enter a mad dash to connect as many brains as possible. But where are we going to find the brains? I ask out loud. There are those in Jimbali village who've been training in these techniques. Some may have the potential. Soraya's influence is overpowered by Aether's. There are 16 potential candidates who can match our power of synchronicity. At this notion, Soraya and I physically turn our heads to face Aether, disconnected now in our lack of ability to contribute to this part of the conversation, but Aether fills our minds. The 16 gods who govern the balance of the elements on Ainjol are entities capable of the same magic as the Jimbali, having come to godship in times before those techniques were lost. Now that there is potential again for humans to become as gods, if we could train powerful enough magic users to temporarily maintain the balance of the elements, we could free up each of those gods to contribute to our psychic network. Question, Soraya blurts out, throwing a hand in the air. Wouldn't we be limited only to powerful psychics to replace the gods? Do enough of those exist? Not quite, I signal to her. Like I told Gil, if we create a database of all spells, all someone would have to do is memorize them and have access to enough mana to use them. Mages with especially high spiritual attunement can tap into higher mana concentrations, which is what allowed the Beastmen to make advancements as quickly as they have. But whereas their psychics are underpowered in producing formulas to train their mages, we can do so instantaneously. Can we teach these people fast enough to give us access to the gods before Akira finds someone to network with? Soraya asks into my mind, then says aloud, more importantly, and turns to Aether, will these gods comply with our plan? For a moment I'm confused as to why anyone, especially a god, wouldn't want to work to protect their universe, but as Aether's expression shifts downward and a sigh escapes her throat, I remember that nobody is that simple. If you will indulge me, Takuma, she begins, in truth I am ecstatic to be able to communicate on this level with you both. What all I think it best you both know cannot be transmitted accurately in language. Will you please allow me to alter your mind just a bit? I smile and shake my head. I can't say no to that. I am unstructured. Opaquely I sense withinness, but no place, yet time passes. There is linearity. I structure myself upon that line and take shape. As I do, I realize I am alone as a shape, yet not alone in time. There seem to be things, but they come and go erratically in blips on rare occasions. To maintain shape, I must contain these things, but they are always jostling, fighting to rearrange. But time is on my side. All of these things are trapped by time, and when united, they become difficult to move. The more I pull them together, the more there is shape, but as I give shape, there is also exterior to it. Through shape, I can see the schema of time and understand its lack of ultimate authority over existence. There is yet a higher God, and if time below them, then I am third in line. Causality, I notice, causes patterns. Even within my ability to create space, there is natural arrangement through causality, fractal patterns and spirals. I study these and become obsessed with understanding them, developing a kind of empathy for the god of causality. It seems every bit as curious to experiment and create as myself, yet I cannot conceive of what it may look to as a god higher than itself. Time, likewise, seems to be a passion project, yet for me is like a prison in the face of what could be done beyond it. I live an amount of it you could never comprehend by the time I encounter Yog-Sothoth. Only in that moment do I glimpse an understanding of unreality, an existence without shape, beyond time, impossible within the confines of causality. It's from somewhere else, but what's it doing here? Before I can ask, I know, and then it nearly tears me apart to hear. For 1 second I vibrate to a millennia the wavelength of a scream. It is the malignance. It is going to kill causality. I am absolutely certain that this universe is eventually going to fall to the malignance. However, I am brought back from the brink of insanity when considering that for this thing to be, it must have been created, just like anything else. If something could be created which went beyond causality, then maybe I could create something beyond causality too? I just had to figure out how, which meant understanding the principles of causality perfectly. And so I open a frequency to all matter taking shape in my universe that, if it could tap into, would grant access to my knowledge of causality, and we could study it together. Thus, over trillions of years, each of the lower deck gods came to be, each understanding the theories developed before and after their beginnings, but continuing to maintain the balance of what their own theorems suggest possible through specialization. To some extent, we are all connected still, but their concentration on keeping their elements in check needs to be such that psychic conversation is too distracting. Even for me, talking to them in person is necessary. Thinking the word me snaps me out of Aether's influence, as my mind rejects the notion that these barely comprehensible memories could qualify as mine. And yet, though much of what I just saw rapidly dissipates from my mind as I can't fit any images I understand to them, I get the point of Aether's story. "Question!" Soraya blurts out into what must be silence but sure hasn't felt like it. I did not get a sense of whether the lower deck gods would or would not help us from that story. To tell the truth, I don't know, Aether replies with a tinge of sadness. I want to believe that they would. After all, they continue to maintain their balance and keep the universe operating as they want it to, and yet... She pauses, then beams into our minds again. Akita is not mine, she seems to say. I don't understand, Soraya responds. The god of time, I mutter. I don't know why I understand. The dots just connect for me in that moment, and it's like I can predict the future. Indeed, Aether shudders, clearly disturbed at the very thought. I have been moved by causality, but always wished I could go beyond time. I have to think he would be the same. So he brought Akita here to stop me from stopping Yog-Sothoth because he thinks that it will free him from the god of causality, and you're worried if that snake-tongued lawyer starts talking to the lower deck gods, then they might want to be free from you, I observe. Aether's gaze turns downward, almost ashamed, and I feel guilty for my somewhat accusatory tone. Then the god of time believes it is possible, Soraya says, now with a hand on her chin and the other arm tucked under her elbow. I can't help but crack a smile at the suggestion. That guy's got to know more than we do, right? And clearly he can't just get rid of us without having to use an agent. Aether enters our minds again. Whereas time, not unlike the elemental magics keeping Ainjol balanced, needs to be constantly and linearly managed for nothing to slip through the cracks, space is a lot more lenient. It can be morphed nearly at will and made essentially irrelevant with enough mana power. Question! Soraya shouts again. What is mana? We'll save that for another time, Aether says with a wave of the hand. Right, I interject. For now it seems we've got a fairly clear idea of the plan. We're going to have to simultaneously train up a group of mages who can replace each of the gods, while also visiting each of them to recruit them to the cause before Akita gets to them. How best can we go about accomplishing this? I will recruit the gods, Soraya responds. I stare at her for a second and blink, trying to think of how to formulate my response, but Soraya psychically interjects and reads my impressions before I can speak. It would have been something like, maybe we should send someone with more direct communication skills. I will be bringing Baika, she continues. There's something more. I can tell she understands something I don't, but doesn't know how to communicate it even telepathically. All I can really glean is her absolute trust in Baika and the idea of bringing her along. I decide to believe in it. Okay, I agree. Aether and I have an easier time interfacing, I suppose, and more importantly, I get the feeling I'm going to be the wordsmith responsible for transcribing and explaining all this convoluted magic bullshit. Hey! Soraya snaps her fingers to ensure that I turn to stare straight at her, and then points at my face. You can finally make use of that writing degree. I've never felt so attacked in my entire life. Mind melding is a cruel, cruel thing. Go kiss your girlfriend, I spit into her mind. I will, she remarks, and with a pompous smile and puff of the chest leaves the room. I turn to Aether. Guess we ought to get to work ASAP, huh? I ask. Actually, Takuma, I have to say first of all how grateful I am. Admittedly, I didn't know if you'd recover from the trauma of the attack in time to fight back, but you did. Thank you. Ah, well, just trying not to let the universe die and all, I guess, I reply. In truth, I'm not even sure I've completely switched from doing this because I have no choice to doing this because I want to save the universe, but one thing is certain. I've made a lot of interesting connections on this journey so far, and I have a mind to protect them. Aether speaks up again. To tell the truth, I always wanted to reveal more to you, but without enough time spent here to understand the nature of my magic, I wasn't sure it would make any sense. I get it. To tell the truth, I'm amazed how well the cards are falling into place. This causality thing is pretty impressive. Aether weirdly seems to lightly blush upon hearing me say that. Then she compliments me in a way I wasn't expecting. I think you're even more impressive, Takuma. Now I'm blushing too. Come on now. In a way, I'm just one of your creations too, right? When you were in my mind, I understood. This isn't really another world in the sense of how we think of it in light novels, is it? The strength of our psychic power is in our connection to the wavelength, right? Yet even though Soraya was the most powerful psychic known to this planet, she became exponentially more powerful through networking with me. Why would this connection have so much more consequence than her latent power? Sorry, I realize you know all of this. It's okay. I understand that this helps you to process the information. Thank you. Connecting with you is a very warm and pleasant feeling, almost indulgent. I almost feel, I want to say guilty, but it's not right. Yet, in a wafting sensation, I can feel that Aether understands. Anyways, I figure there's one set of people that even autistic idiots like me and Soraya can sympathize with. It's the people we both spent our whole lives analyzing and deconstructing, trying to figure out how to put their pieces back into something that made sense. If we're pulling all of our powers from parallel universes, then it's probably because we're networking with alternate versions of ourselves, who've had most of the same experiences that we've had. The more consistent someone is across many universes, likely due to their natural access to the psychic wavelength in all of those places, the more access they have to other versions of themselves. Does this sound about right? You seem to understand, Aether responds with a patient smile. But it's still not enough. Even if you can process your own ideas harder than most people, you're still limited to the range of perspectives held by all those other versions of you. Moreover, it's easy to accept your own ideas because the logic behind them is close enough to what you've already experienced. But if you can connect two different people with that high level of personal processing power, in combining their understandings, they can imagine things which they never would have on their own, expanding the possibilities almost infinitely. Well, Aether interjects, from your perspective now it would seem that way, but consider the magnitude of difference in possibility which would have come from adding even one more mind into the mix. In doing so, you will understand that for the three of us, including myself, with heavy control over space, to have not conquered Akira instantaneously means not only that we haven't fully explored the possibilities within ourselves, but that we will need to uncover untold numbers of possibilities in order to counteract all that is possible for Akira. For a moment I remain in silence, poring over all of what I've just learned. While it's clear what we have to do, there's something not quite settling in. Something keeping me from fully connecting myself to these circumstances and feeling ready to step into the next stage of the battle ahead. So much is going on in my mind in so many different directions. I don't know if beaming it all to Aether would produce something comprehensible, so instead I search for just the right question to get what I seem to want to know. Aether, why did you choose me to save the universe? Of course, this really ought to be the million-dollar question, right? Maybe I forgot to ask because I already had it answered before, but now there's obviously more to know. It's because I liked your stories, Aether immediately responds to my surprise. The way that causality was treated in your stories was like you connected to it as the obvious binding thread of our universe, yet rejected it in premise. It felt like you were intent on going out of your way to break every conceivable rule, even if someone had already broken it before, just to be the person who broke the most rules. You even killed yourself with a smile on your face. I thought that only someone as unreasonable as that could defeat an incomprehensible foe. Aether wears a motherly smile through her explanation, and I feel myself being peeled back like an onion layer, with my own matching smile to boot. I can't even take it as praise. Being told that the contrarianism I've been beating myself up over the last 15 years is somehow going to save the universe would make my tween self so happy that my current self is entering a recursive spiral of cringe. And yet, here is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, utterly enamored with the thought of what she believes I can accomplish. It's too much. "It's not just that, though," she continues. "That wouldn't be enough, I think, but there's something in the way you talked about what you wanted." What I wanted? I have to ask at this point because even I'm not sure what she means. If there's one thing I've never been able to get a grip on in life, it's what I want. Do I want to be famous and respected? Would I be satisfied if I made something I called a masterpiece? Could I have been happy just taking life a bit slower? It was precisely my lack of answers to these questions which had brought me to the brink. "I suppose to you they were such unreasonable fantasies that you didn't even connect to them as real desires. But the way you portray love, the way you portray your love for your ideas, even in the books you pretended were bad and not serious, made me think that if you just knew you could have what you wanted, you'd do absolutely anything to get it." That much I could see in myself. When I thought I had a future as a novelist in my grasp, I'd burned my wick at both ends for half a decade trying to make it happen, until my mind completely snapped. If the clarity of mind granted from my slow days in Evermere had convinced me of anything, it was that the real cause of my death was overwork. Well, I don't know if you're right about that, but I've carried myself a long way. I told you before that I had a reason to live, and even if everything else but that goes away... I turn to her. She's gone pink from remembering the promise to which I'm referring, the one from the start of my journey. I continue, "Then indeed, I'll fight for it as hard as I can. Because I can." Chapter 3. A Greater Death. Akita wades calves deep up a quiet creek the color of lead. It is bleak here as always, pale black skies merging indistinguishably into trees. There is nothing to see, especially as he crosses into the maw of the cave. Without sight, Akita navigates by earth magic, interpreting his surroundings geometrically. With infrared magic, he watches scurrying masses of insects, which might have torn to bone a creature with less readable malice emanating from their presence. After 15 minutes down narrowing, widening, and branching paths, Akita comes to the edge of a cliff. He pulsates a combination of analytical spells and various magics to form a mental schema of the environment. The pit is deep. As far as he can tell, it goes straight to hell. Akita jumps in. After 45 minutes of freefall, he concludes he may as well take this opportunity to nap. The jolt of plunging 50 yards into the planet's molten core wakes him with a start, and all of his clothes burn off as he quickly swims back up to the surface of the lava. Whipping his head to toss the magma from his eyes, he takes in the brightly lit surroundings. Here the pit is some 10 meters in diameter, and there's a short but climbable shoreline leading into a cave in the wall of it, which Akita swims over to, climbing up and entering the more visible cave while summoning a designer suit onto his body from his home back in his original universe. What a shithole that place was, he thinks. All that grinding I did to get where I was, when I could have just come here and done whatever I wanted with this power. And some BFA thinks he's gonna stop me from taking over this place? Ha! Once I've cleared him and that bitch goddess out, I'm gonna live like a god for the rest of time until Yogg swallows it all. Before long, the cave empties into a cavern so large as to feel no different from stepping out onto the countryside, except in a world where scant light only comes from below, in the small patches of lava peeking above vast plains of ash, dotted with oak-sized, cactus-esque plants with skin like sheets of charcoal. As he casually navigates the somewhat visible ashen desert, one of his legs suddenly sinks into black sludge, a pit of oil. His leg doesn't respond to his attempt to pull it out. He continues sinking. Realizing the futility of the situation, he allows himself to be drawn into the deepest pit of the dark. Akita sinks and drowns. He chokes and clings to his neck, heaving to force the oil from his esophagus, but is incapable. The pressure starts to squish and push his eyeballs out. The black liquid takes life in his ears, pouring down into his cranium and filling his head with mud. He is brain dead in 4 minutes. Yet alive. The oil pit eventually pours out in a 40-meter waterfall onto the peak of a mountain that's taller than Japan is long, overlooking the blackened inner world of Ainjol, a hell lit only by the constant explosions blasting randomly across its closed sky, as the endless oil and lava spurting from ground and ceiling collide. Akita smashes against the mountain's peak and is ricocheted hurtling down the mountain, too brain dead to care. After bouncing about 1,000 times on his way to the ground, he lands directly in a human-sized metal chute, leading further underground, where he spirals through looping pipelines like a Sonic 2 level, and is finally shat out onto the smooth, hard, obsidian spherical heart of planet Angel. Since Akira is functionally dead, he doesn't perceive any of this happening, just as he doesn't sense a figure coming to stand over him and talk at his corpse.
A touch away. Just one touch. Everything else has been done to you now but that.
The voice is hollow as air, only loud enough to sneak into an ear. The figure starts to bend over, reaching out an appendage toward Akira's body, but before it touches him it senses something. There is a ripple, a vibration from somewhere inside this would-be corpse, working to solve this whole death issue.
You have it then. Life will be yours if you grasp it.
The first thought to cross Akira's restructured brain is, I can't waste any more time. His recovery speed has increased exponentially, along with his understanding of the highest theorems in death magic. Along the way, he's come to grasp the purpose of death, the need for it in himself. It isn't a huge leap for him. Akira has always known that death could be right around the corner, which is why he's as ruthless as possible in making as much progress in life as he can, as fast as he can. At every stage of education, he fast-tracked as much as possible. Honors programs, club activities, summer school, cramming gyms, college programs, Tokyo University. He'd been poised to go farther and faster than anyone, and it was snapped away in the blink of an eye. Yet here he is, not only brought to another dimension with untold power, but conquering his way back from the absolute brink of death just for a second chance. All it takes is repeating his motto, if you're still alive, continue to conquer. Upon the reformation of his throat, he shouts, still eyeless, into the void, "You cannot guarantee the death of causality without me!" Despite its volume, his voice doesn't seem to carry, as if there's no space beyond him for it to travel.
Child, you do not inform me. I have tested you, and you have lived.
The god of death, Nibiblim, speaks into his mind, as his ears have not yet formed. "Then you will cluster with me," Akira pronounces hopefully.
"I will join you. You can't do what you're hoping to without an understanding which I'm unfit to teach. But I will guide you, and when the time comes, I will fight with you."
"And what of death in that time?" Akira asks.
"Suspended, as it only can be, except for those I touch. There is a greater death to assure upon this world, one which may offer it at last even to myself."
Chapter 4. Cast School in the Sky. The last way I wanted to start my day was staring at a completely blown open head and torso, but here I am, on the orange plains of Kurdla, screaming soldiers scrambling all around me, explosions rocking the sky, and shit flying everywhere, staring essentially at just a sliver of spine and flesh connected to intact legs, encircled for a few yards by viscera. "This confirms it, then," I state without warmth. Gil is squinting to see as little of it as she can, and trying not to cry as she nods. I quick fly us both back up to Laputa, a floating castle which I've built a mile above the front line of Boromir's invasion of Kurdla, on the world's strongest magic ley line. We land in the courtyard, an epic atrium topped by a ruptured glass dome, housing overgrown ancient plants which spew through the halls and up the walls of the castle all over. There is a clearing in which stands the atrium's central gazebo, and pathways made through the plants throughout the castle to all of the rooms. As we touch down on the marble floor surrounding the gazebo, I use one of my favorite new spells, a hometown special called the Psychic Email. Instead of blasting people with in-the-moment thought mergers, I formulate a statement, package it, and leave it in others' mental inbox to be checked at their discretion. Granted, this rarely means more than a few minutes for most of my recipients. It reads as follows. Update on the death situation. As suspected, it seems like you can't die. You can be functionally dead, but not die. We've seen people wounded in ways which should have killed them continuing to think and breathe, so the exact mechanics of this undeath are unclear. But even bodies completely lacking in any signs of life are retaining the spiritual energy which would ordinarily dissipate into the environment upon death. Under normal circumstances, this would be taken as a person having the ability to potentially make a recovery, so don't count yourself out just because you can't think anymore. Takoyaki Takuma.
Aren't you going to mention what this means?
Gil asks after reading my email. We don't know for certain what this means. Akira hasn't made any moves, and the consequences of this change are still unclear. As far as we know, this could work in our favor.
Not likely.
Aether's telepathy comes into our minds as she emerges into the atrium.
No one has ever come close to mastering death magic, including myself. Nibiblum created it early in the planet's history, feeling that evolution was impossible if organisms could only fuse in and out of one another and never consume the strength of others into themselves. He's never let up on the rules for a second, and only ever expanded their complexity. If he's stopping death, it can only be because he wants to be extremely selective about who gets to die.
But he hasn't made anyone die abruptly either, I counter. On some level, he's obviously obsessive about his rules. He won't kill anyone if he hasn't been justified within the rules of his magic, meaning he can't kill us unless they beat us. If we can't kill them either, then it's still just a matter of staying ahead of them and keeping them at bay until we're strong enough to expel Yog-Sothoth.
I'm sorry,
Gil interjects, clutching her staff with a solemn expression.
I understand you're hopeful, but hearing all of this in a row is so much.
I smile and tell her, return to the dorms with the others. We'll have class in half an hour, so enjoy the little downtime you can.
I will, sir. Thank you.
She responds with a bow and hurries off down the hall. I haven't gotten used to being called sir just yet. Aether turns to me with her usual soft and heartwarming smile.
You should take the opportunity yourself,
she says. No need, I reply. I've got my own solution for that. What I've got is a new kind of addiction, something superseding even my lovely psychic drugs, which grow all over the castle, and that is writing. In order to manage all of this, I just haven't stopped writing. To maximize effectiveness, I've coordinated with myself across a vast number of dimensions in order to collectively run a couple dozen parallel thought processes. Most of these are dedicated to computing magical theorems, and some of them are independently sharing data chains with Aether. Others are interpreting sensory data on a much higher level than normal so I can perceive any change in the environment instantly. And one is just writing. Sometimes it's making up new stories and running with them until it's tired. Sometimes it's continuing stories I started in the past, or even the ones which I was publishing before I died, with ideas flowing so easily that far more get abandoned than are formulated into words. Sometimes it's just writing about what's happening in this very moment, or what happened just before, or journalizing, making editorials of my observations and experiences, never stopping. All I can say is that it's keeping me sane, and seemingly doing whatever sleep is supposed to do normally, 'cause I ain't doing that no more.
Kiddies?
Gil calls out as I step through the sliding door into the classroom. I stride over to the podium at the front, and she tells the other 6 students to bow. They do, and then she tells them to sit, and they do that as well, scooting their chairs up to their desks. If you told me I was one day going to force a bunch of kids to undergo Japanese-style education, I probably would have killed myself. Faster. But if there's anything I know will adapt you to the hardcore lifestyle of the grind, it's the structure of Japanese learning. I call roll. Gilibrit Oriander.
Here!
Gil stands up, hand raised, wearing the standard-issue Japanese girls' sailor uniform that all your favorite 90s anime characters wore. Short sleeves with their messy hair really brings the girl's spunk to the forefront. She gives off less of a cute little beast girl mage image and more of a middle school lacrosse-playing precure protagonist vibe. It was that energy which had inspired me to give her the job of playing superhero in her off hours. Gil is training to take over for the god of spirit, a magic whose presence is often lost in humans throughout their life as they fail to attune it, given its lack of obvious everyday practical value and use. Spirit is the magic which allows harmony between the other magics by way of what I can best describe as a form of empathy. In the same way that we might feel something for an animal because we can recognize it experiencing the same emotions that a human would, spirit magic facilitates the recognition of commonality between different magic systems. Many of its formulas are ideal for learning how to optimize daily use magic in other magical fields, allowing strong spiritual practitioners to effortlessly fill their day with minor spells without disrupting the mana resources of their environment. Since the Beastmen were partially created through spirit magic, they are especially attuned to using it, hence the Jimbali tribe eventually having realized the pathway to god-tier magic. But as I'd learned from her father, Gil herself was more integral to the development of these techniques than she gave herself credit for. Spiritual magic is best developed during childhood. The earlier a child develops an understanding of empathy, the more likely they will be not only to practice it throughout life, but also to have a better shot at mastering the highest level techniques within their lifetime. Gil had been raised as an experiment to teach a child from birth exclusively in the teachings of spiritual magic, disregarding any particular aptitude or interest she might have in any specific element during her development. What she had regarded simply as her everyday life training in the ways of the Jimbali had actually been a first-generation attempt at creating a candidate for godship. There had only been one problem. Gil isn't psychic. Gil could absorb anything which was put into her, but it was very difficult for her to find anything new on her own. What made the Jimbali magic special was that psychic mages could intuit the formulas to spells without needing to be taught. But learning those formulas was different from being able to explain them or draw them out lingually, either of which is vastly more time-consuming than understanding them psychically. Luckily, I'm a light novel author, so the one thing I'm better at than anything is getting the stuff that's in my brain into text as fast as humanly possible. If it were just a matter of the enormous number of possible formulas in existence, it would already be damn near impossible if those magical formulas couldn't also be used to instantly generate text documents from my imagination into reality, but the real trouble was even explaining some of these more esoteric concepts. To tell you the truth, I don't think I'm fit to teach Gil what she really needs to know. She can learn the structure of any formula you give her, even if it's a complex set of signal messages, just as long as she understands exactly what all of it means. If she could understand the root emotion of the language, I'm sure she could finally break through and simply rationalize every other possible combination in a matter of days. But how do I make her understand that core emotional root? The only way I think I understand it is from falling in love. But I don't know how to untangle it. Where was the part in all of that where I felt whatever this feeling is that let me understand this magic so well? I'd mind as much of it as I could talk about in front of a kid for anecdotes and metaphors, hoping somehow if she could relate to this or that angle it might all click, but our conversations would go like this. You know how your father would gladly lay down his life to save you, right?
Of course, I would do the same for him.
But I mean how he'd be glad to do it.
I would be glad to know my father lived, even if it meant my sacrifice.
Yes, but... And then I'd think, what the fuck am I even trying to explain? And then say, never mind. And then rack my brain for a better metaphor. So that's why I decided to turn her into a magical girl. Every day, Gil flies around to the small towns and battlefields here on the borders of Kurdla and protects the innocent from the crimes of the Boromir invaders and those who would profit from the turmoil of the times. I gave her a modified Cure White cosplay to transform into and sent her loose to try and learn something out in the world that I couldn't teach her myself. So far, it mostly seems to be traumatizing her, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad? Daidoji. Here. A massively muscly man-arm takes to the air from one of those 13-year-old boys that makes you think, damn, is this what happens if you drink your milk every day? His hair is in a classic pompadour over some kind of JoJo-esque leather mini-jacket with a massively wide collar on top of a beat-up white undershirt and dramatically ripped-open black jeans. Suffice it to say, on the Billy Idol to Kuwabara spectrum, he's sitting a little closer to Kujo Jotaro. I haven't bothered asking him to try and wear a uniform since he looks like an anime character anyways, plus he doesn't look like someone who'd be interested in wearing what someone told him to. He always has an intense look in his eyes, and I never see him wearing anything else, so I figure it must be some kind of identity thing. Something which I found out long after he, Soraya, and I had been in the same room together several times and she had said nothing, is that Daidoji grew up at the psychic monastery and followed Soraya around, calling her Soraya Ne for years. According to monks, Soraya would share the books that she pulled from other universes with Daidoji, and though he couldn't read, he gradually started trying to look like the characters from those books, even building his own DIY wardrobe and hitting the gym to lift weights every day. While this initially hadn't led to any further psychic development, in the past few months, after finally completing his pompadour, Daidoji's power had suddenly spiked, showing potential to eventually close in on Soraya's. Learning all of that had made me think it'd be easy to talk to him about manga, but I quickly realized he's really defensive about his interests. I've subtly started working more illustrative explanations into my lessons, and his understanding has expanded in kind. He is training to take the place of the god of magnetism. Kirin.
Here.
Yeah, this is where things get weird. Kirin stands up in a uniform which ought to be the same as Gil's, but gives a much different impression when she wears the front unbuttoned, the scarf undone, and thigh-high lingerie clearly connected to a garter belt up her rolled skirt. If I didn't already know what she looked like with my cock inside of her, I'm sure I'd be dying to know. Because of her turning up at the castle, the past week has been nothing but surprises. For one thing, I had never even realized that Kirin was a psychic. Sure, I'd had shivers down my spine both times I met her, but I thought that was for other reasons. Not only that, it was quickly evident to me that she might be as powerful as I am. She would peek it out to me in unbelievably subtle ways that no one else could possibly notice. Like she needed me to convince myself that she's that powerful, but wants only me to know for some reason. That or I'm going completely insane. And maybe that's her goal? Whatever the case, Kirin turned up and, completely innocently, in the eyes of anyone not capable of seeing her ultra-psychic winks and nods, demonstrated her desire and capability of being trained to take the place of the water god Alcest. The thing that confounds me is that if Kirin is really as powerful as I am, then she should already be capable of taking on that role immediately. but she has never suggested this possibility in any way. She simply shows up for class dutifully and acts broadly flirtatious until the bell rings. So far, I haven't even had time to run into her in a context outside of class, or perhaps she's low-key avoiding me. One thing's for sure, she wants me to keep an eye on her, and it's difficult not to. Libely. Here! This young girl shoots out of her chair, hand raised in devil horns. Just looking at her causes guitar shrieks to cut through my imagination. The girl has long, messy, slate gray hair and wears a strange silver disc strapped to her forehead which spins constantly. Don't stare into it. Her right eye is much darker colored than her left, and she has what looks like a tattoo of a bloody teardrop beginning to fall from it. From the top of her head sprouts 4 short horns, almost like little gray lightning rods. Her uniform would be exactly the same as Gil's had she not gone and desaturated it into grayscale to match her overall aesthetic. Her fingerless gloves have pentagrams on them surrounded by 4 groups of 666. The lolly goddess of metal herself hails from the northernmost continent on Angel, called Frostmjar. Everything appears in grayscale there due to the lack of ultraviolet mana in the atmosphere, and maintaining life revolves around heavy application of metal magic for insulating buildings and fire magic for heat. Libely had lived there as one of the most powerful known psychics outside of the monastery, and had never been cooperative with their research or the envoys they sent out to meet her. Monk said that she would always become aggravated that no one knew anything about metal music and storm away from the meetings. When Libely heard my worldwide signal calling on, quote, all-powerful psychics and young magicians with potential and drive to temporarily replace the gods, she came to Laputa right away, vying to replace Gurugamesh as the goddess of metal because, as she put it, Gurugamesh fucking sucks. As soon as we met for the first time, Libely became intensely attached to me for being the first metal fan she'd ever met. After all, recorded music doesn't exist in Angel yet, and certainly not for electric instruments. If anyone from Frostmjar had the same kind of psychic powers, maybe they would understand. The girl does feel right at home in her hometown, but only Libely can tap into the wavelength which specifically allows her to listen to any band listed on metalarchives.com. Naturally, she's the type of metal fan who will correct you if you describe a band's genre with less than exact terminology. After finding out that I listened to Boris, Libely pulled a metal brick from her little DIY black bat-winged backpack and magically embossed it into a photograph of my Devilman t-shirt so that she could write a song about it that night. At 6:10 a.m. I woke with a jolt when a brick-shitting death grind riff psycho punched my thought box. She is a kid, so I try to be patient with her. Hola Ganja. Yeah! This guy can best be described as a human-sized iguana in a school uniform. Like, he's just humanoid enough to fit into the uniform, but anything sticking out of it is pure huge lizard. To be honest, I haven't gotten to know him all that much because his lung capacity only allows him to exhale 1 syllable at a time in a heavy burst. As far as I can tell, he doesn't have any psychic powers either. We only communicate through signals. However, his progress in understanding plant magic has been on par with my own. As fast as I can produce formulas, he can understand and execute them. I've dedicated 2 pan-dimensional thought processes solely to grinding plant magic formulas, hoping to get this guy into god shape ASAP. Byla.
Here.
Another familiar face, and my best defense against losing my eyes in Kirin's pale chest too often. Byla fills out her school uniform like Kagome from Inuyasha, a barely legal, ultra-sexy, proper high school girl with the most stone-cold Kogal attitude imaginable. I have to convince myself that she simply has no opinion of me because if she has one, it almost certainly is not very high. Then again, I've never seen her say an unnecessary word to anyone. Can't tell if Ray clone or stone cold hater, but either way, I'm into it. Byla, it turns out, has always had relatively benign psychic powers. She had only found some basic use for them early in her development, but because she was taught under the traditional methods of her father and the Boromir military, and heavily specialized in gravity magic from a young age, she had largely ignored her psychic powers, thinking they wouldn't help her to reach her maximum potential. Once her father was aware of my situation, he sent her away from the Evermere reconstruction project to come train under me. While Byla easily keeps up with my lessons, and I've dedicated another 2 thought processes to gravity spells with the same hopes in her that I have in Hola Ganja to reach God tier quickly, her psychic understanding hasn't developed that much in the time since coming here, and I haven't had the chance to work with her directly to help with it. She has never approached me outside of the context of class, and the only time I've seen her smile was when she reunited and shared a hug with Baika. And Baby Mewtwo.
Here.
I don't know what to tell you. It's Baby Mewtwo. I guess I should explain. Here on Angel, an ancient race of psychics created the first civilization through extensive use of psychic communication. These creatures evolved to be immortal and quickly ceased reproduction so as to prevent an eventual overpopulation. Ever since, the couple hundred of the species which have survived on the planet have done so in an intricate cave village underneath its south pole. None of this is known to the current civilization dominating Angel, though the Mewtwo's are aware of their existence. When I put out my worldwide signal, they conceived of the very first new Mewtwo child in 3 millennia to send for my training. Being as he was literally a newborn when he arrived, baby Mewtwo had no established personality or thought structure. Ordinarily, a new Mewtwo would instantly cluster with the rest of the hive and have exactly the same understanding from birth, but the hive did not link to this new baby. Instead, he linked to me. As such, baby Mewtwo essentially knows everything that I know. All of my channels of thought across all the dimensions which I can communicate, including those I share with anyone else on my network such as Aether or Soraya, goes through him as well. Baby Mewtwo is essentially my psychic clone, in the form of a baby Mewtwo. Needless to say, he's adorable. Class begins, which amounts to a flurry of signals back and forth between me and my 7 students. I dump knowledge into their brains, they demonstrate their understanding or lack thereof in response, and I guide them until they have a breakthrough, or move on to something else if it seems like they'll be better served returning to it later. Byla and Hologanja are my honor students, practically repositories of information in the magics they specialize in, and highly capable of adapting to other languages through their applications to those magics. Baby Mewtwo, of course, has little reason to even be here, but since he's a baby, there has to be someone keeping an eye on him at all times. Kirin may as well be a straight-A student as well, but every so often she asks me for clarification about things just for attention. Sometimes I just ignore her. It's Libely, Daidoji, and Gil who end up being the focus of most of my attention and actual instructional work. In Libely's case, it's less that she doesn't understand the material and more that her methods of expressing that understanding require further deconstruction and analysis. Imagine, if you will, that you gave a student a math question and they answered it by playing a metal riff. You're gonna need another answer. Daidoji's issue is the natural self-obsession of a teenager, which I remember all too well. The needing to relate everything back to yourself in order to understand it, but being able to do so with incredible ease because you're constantly projecting. It's because I lived through it that I don't have much difficulty with Daidoji. I just have to think about how I can relate something he doesn't understand to a situation that plays into his self-image. What I never expected to be my most difficult student is Gil. Having grown up with so much emphasis placed on the importance of empathy and understanding, Gil is deeply invested in the meaning of spirit magic, and yet she fundamentally doesn't get it. Empathy is such a matter of course for her that she simply can't understand someone who is lacking in it, and by comparison to her, that means every human being on the planet. As a result, this person obsessed with empathy can't seem to appreciate the irony of also being the most judgmental person in the castle. And granted, she's not wrong about anything she says, but you couldn't find more of an echo chamber for those ideals than this environment. Thankfully, I've seen more than enough anime to know what these kids need. All 3 of them need a group of friends. Daidoji had needed Soraya. Since she left, he's disappeared into combing his identity. Gil and Libely both come from monocultural environments surrounded by people who easily understand them, and have never been challenged to learn to communicate with others who fundamentally don't. Byla is a bit older and has probably picked up a lot of worldliness from her father's tutelage, Hologanja from his close communion with the plants of the world. Kirin is literally an adult, and baby Mewtwo is essentially me, ergo my diagnosis is that the root cause of trouble in my class is being sheltered, spoiled kids. Thus, I've decided to do the most anime thing imaginable and manufacture a friendship between them. And so, when class is dismissed and the others go off to their own assignments, the 3 of them remain with me to attend the Kinship Club. Chapter 5. The Kinship Club.
Yes! Yes, yes! It's the big one!
Libely shouts, claws out toward the sky and beaming with unchecked mania. In the outdoor sun, her gray palette seems to be sucking color out of existence. She is seated beside Gil and Daidoji at a sunny little cafe where Takuma told them to gather, as each of them reads over the psychic email they've just received. I want to play bass, Daidoji states immediately.
Get ready to sit at the bottom of the mix, buddy boy,
Libely jabs. My complex microtonal slapping will be unignorable, Daidoji furiously retorts.
Hold on a minute, you guys.
Gil muscles her way into the conversation.
We haven't even talked about what kind of music we're going to make yet.
The bass is foundational in nearly every genre, Daidoji quickly snaps. You can formulate whatever you want on the structure of my bass lines.
That's 2 votes for sludge metal,
Libely proclaims.
No, it's not.
Gil stands her ground.
I don't mind if you want to play the guitar, but we don't have to specify a genre like that. Okay then, are you some kind of genius who's gonna learn every instrument and every genre and mash them all together in some massive prog opus, huh? What's your big idea?
Libely presses, smiling as she stares Gil right in the eyes from below.
It's not like that,
Gil protests.
I'm just saying I don't even know what sludge metal is, and maybe we could experiment and find a sound that pleases all of us. Like you said, you don't even know sludge metal. How can you know if it's a sound you'll like or not? Someone with a little bit of sense like you ought to be able to understand the subtle nuances of getting lost in a droning sludge riff. Stop trying to change my point. I'm saying maybe we'll end up gravitating to one genre or another once we figure out how we play together, but there's no sense in deciding straight from the outset what it's gonna be. Daidoji said he's satisfied as long as he gets to play bass. I picked the genre with bass. Okay, well, I don't even know what I want to play yet. To have a metal band, you need guitars and drums.
And I'm good with either, but I'm also going to be lead vocal.
I'm telling you, I don't know if I want to play a guitar. What if I want to play a piano or a flute or something? Okay, well, look, Takuma didn't say we have to be a live performing band, and these days you can just play parts of your track over the PA and get away with it. So if you want, I could just track both guitars and drums in the recording and give you spots for vibraphone flourishes or whatever weird tribal thing you want to play. I don't even know what any of that means, and besides, I don't want to be just a bit performer for your songwriting. Doesn't a proper band cooperate on writing the songs together? This is the Kinship Club, after all.
I'll be writing all the bass parts, Daidoji interrupts.
Do you intend to dictate the entire structure of the song through doing so, or will you be interested in cooperation on that front? Libely asks.
Daidoji goes into thought.
Look, I understand that neither of you knows all that much about making music, but I do, Libely continues. While there are some great bands who really hash out every element of the song together, there are just as many amazing bands who are led by a single creative visionary who writes all the songs around the talents at their disposal, and those performers are happy because they enjoy playing their instruments and they get to play good music. I've got plenty of ideas for how I can use you guys to make a song.
You don't know anything about my talents,
Gil debates.
I've never even picked up an instrument before. I don't even know which ones I can play.
You're a fast learner, Gil, Libely compliments. Learning one instrument is just like learning any other. I've picked up most of them at least once just to spice up my experimental tracks. And anyway, whatever you pick, I can find a way to work it into the final product.
Daidoji.
Gil turns to the boy, who's sitting with his feet up on the table, arms crossed over his chest and laid back with his usual brooding frown. She asks,
Would you be interested in learning to play any instruments besides the bass?
Absolutely not. The bass is the only instrument of any real significance, he responds.
Do you see, Libely? The musicians you describe who love their instruments are people with a special relationship with those instruments. You see the bass as just one of many tools at your disposal to realize your creative vision, but to Daidoji, his only interest in music is to serve as the foundation which others can build upon.
It's true. No one listens to just bass, Libely acquiesces, causing a loud tch from Daidoji as his eyes shift from the table.
Can't we have some time to try different things out together? You can play all kinds of instruments, and I have a few that I'm interested in. Maybe we can mix and match them and find our own sound that matches with Daidoji's bass.
Well, it's not like I'm lacking in imagination, Libely responds. I'm sure I can find a way to match something against whatever it is you're doing. I don't know if you'll like what direction I take in matching you, though.
It'll be worth a shot, right?
Gil asks.
Why do you have to make everything so edgy and aggressive?
Gil shouts over wailing amp noise as she lowers the quiver from her violin.
Because that's the way it is!
Libely hollers in response, deliberately holding the still vibrating strings of her Frankenstein guitar made out of welded-together metal chunks to the face of the amplifier, emitting a persistent high-pitched squeal through the studio room. Daidoji turns up the sound in his headphones and continues thumping on the bass to drown out all the noise and ensuing argument.
I don't think it's going to help the Kinship Club to make music that doesn't in any way reflect kinship as an ideal.
Gil shouts as Libely finally yanks the cord from her guitar, ending the noise in a horrific gnashing of electrical pops.
How can you say that about metal music? The metal community is very inviting, Libely snaps back.
That's just what Takuma told you. You don't know anything about the metal community because it's just yourself.
Well, I know myself.
And what part of you is inviting? All of these songs are about hating people, hating society, celebrating drugs and murder. Some of your lyrics literally describe sexual assault as if it were fun.
Well, it would be fun for the person doing it.
And why would you ever want to relate to a terrible person like that?
Gil, you're supposed to be taking over for the god of empathy. You have to be able to empathize with everyone.
Gil sighs, realizing she's once again put herself in the same place that Takuma is constantly trying to dig her out of. She's sure that those kinds of people will never contribute to society in the first place. All of them are selfish scumbags who regret society by exerting their will upon the weak. Exactly the kinds of filth she'd been sweeping off the streets of Kurdla every morning before class as a magical girl. Would empathizing with those people really benefit the world in any way? It seemed like eliminating their ability to act was the only way to protect society from some of these people who'd become so set in their forceful ways. As she reflects on this topic once more, Libely continues.
Metal music isn't about wanting to kill people, it's about the fact that you want to kill people. I'm not gonna let you tell me you haven't wanted to kill anyone before. Every day,
Gil suddenly mumbles, her vision downcast. Libely and Daidoji turn to her in surprise as she repeats,
I want to kill people every stupid day!
Libely beams with a shark-toothed smile.
Now that's what I'm talking about! Band name, album title, track title, lead single, and hook. I want to kill people every stupid day! That's the part of myself that I hate!
Gil shouts back at her, almost ready to cry. Libely's smile doesn't crack. She responds,
Here's what that part of me sounds like,
and plugs her guitar back in. Her tuning is bottomed out. A wall of orange amps tuned for drones saturate the atmosphere with a low, grumbling tone as she strikes a single chord and holds it for 16 deadening seconds. Then she plays a riff. She hangs on that last note again. Daidoji and Gil watch with surprise at the patient expression and slow movement of the younger girl as she crushes them with this massive noise. After the riff comes back through again, Daidoji counteracts the depth of the drone's tonality with a more cleanly toned, almost guitar-like bass lick on the lower strings. Boom, 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 jigga-doo-doo-doo-doo, boom, 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 jigga-doo-doo-doo-doo. Their riffs melt into one another perfectly. As the heavy riffs continue to drone on and call and response, Gil is gradually enveloped in a kind of clarity, as though every part of her charging thoughts beyond those which can project onto this sound are being numbed, driving her focus straight into the feelings that she's picking up from the other's sound. It's a kind of throbbing feeling, like these melodies need to be dragged together and made whole under the guidance of something more persistent. Thump, 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 a beating fist growing louder, banging again and again on the doors of triumph, blasting away darkness with purpose and charging forward, percussive force. Before she knows it, she's seated at the drums, pushing the bass pedal down again and again. Dun, 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 crash! Boom, 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 dun, dun, dun. As the riff continues on, Gil starts adding pummeling, frenzied fills. Daidoji lengthens his bass line with unique flourishes or rearranges the notes within the key, and Libely stomps different buttons on the pedals strewn about her amps to change the tonality and effects on her guitars as she continues repeating the same drone ad nauseum. But in all these micro-evolutions there is electricity, something like a song but also a canvas for their projections, a single riff onto which every related emotion can be poured. It continues for 17 straight minutes before Libely finally holds the drone at the end of the riff for so long that she starts to drift to sleep. Chapter 6. Blood Basilica Battlefront. The architecture of the Blood Basilica is alien to Baika and Soraya. A tall, ornate building with a dome roof, it is topped by an imposing crucifix which heavily bleeds from a wound on the side of the man nailed to the cross, the blood spilling over the dome and catching in fountain pools at the building's base to be recycled back into the macabre sculpture above.
Such an imposing temple,
Baika says, chilly with the feeling that this display almost seems to celebrate its own gruesomeness.
I wonder what sort of god this Jesus is.
Indeed, the impression she has of this foreign god is nothing like the one they gave deference to back in Evermere. From the Kaskul base in Kurdla, the girls have traveled southeast to the nation of Gurgamin, a mountainous region light with civilization besides small, highly religious independent villages among the valleys. One of these, the town of Jehovah, houses Shangri-La, or as it's known to travelers who've heard of it, the Blood Basilica, alone above the village on the side of a mountain some 3 miles up. Soraya pushes open both of the massive doors with her psychic powers as she strides through, hands in the pockets of her jacket. The interior is somehow even more overwrought and horrific. It is set up as a forum with an ornate podium at the front and rows of pews which face it, all seating crops of rotted corpses. Blood seeps down the walls and rains in light drizzle from the high ceiling. Ew, Baika squirms, realizing that they're going to have to walk through the bloody rain. Soraya quickly erects a visible, blue-tinged barrier around the two of them.
We won't get wet,
she proclaims, and doesn't break her stride into the morbid church. Tepidly following her lover into the temple, Baika starts to take in more of the surroundings and quickly notices a figure standing at the podium on the far side of the room, an enormous coal-skinned man mistakable for a featureless shadow at this distance. As the girls make it halfway into the room, keeping their eyes on the man at the podium to avoid glancing at the dead bodies, it becomes apparent that he is shirtless and rippling with humongous muscles. He seems about as big and as black as a man can be. When he finally speaks, the bass timbre of his voice resonates through the hall like thunder in the sky.
You stand before Angel's god of blood, the earthly vessel of a foreign god brought back to life in another world after my death at the hands of my people. Jesus H. Christ!
Question, Soraya blurts out, to Baika's surprise. Jesus hesitates a moment and then responds,
Yes, child?
What does the H stand for?
She asks. Jesus waits a beat but does not answer and simply continues.
What cause have you to occupy my concentration?
Baika answers.
We come from the castle Laputa at the behest of Aether and the coalition of those who wish to use her power to defend our friend Takuma from the vassal of Yog-Sothoth until he is powerful enough to save the universe. We are here to seek your aid in this endeavor upon our agreement to present you with someone who could hold the reins of your magic while you join in the fight.
Preposterous, Jesus interrupts. No such life exists on this planet.
I can do it,
Soraya speaks into his mind.
How dare you interrupt my thoughts? I hold the operation of your own life within my power, Jesus booms.
Look at your world, she signals again. Shaking his head angrily at the subsequent interruption, Jesus overclocks his mind to run a check on what hiccups of blood flow might have occurred while his attention was diverted, but he finds nothing.
I took your place, Soraya explains. I had just as much of you as you did, so I corrected your mistakes while you were distracted.
Huh. And what point will there be for us to trade positions? Jesus asks.
None, Soraya responds. She doesn't seem ready to follow up that statement, so Baika continues to explain.
We are only here to show you what is possible, and to attract your interest in our goal. Our enemy Akira is also trying to recruit the lower deck gods to his cause of destroying the universe. But if the others will fight against those that seek that outcome, then we can change it.
As Baika's emotional plea disappears and echoes through the cathedral, Jesus closes his eyes, exhales into a smile, and then starts to laugh from the chest.
And who are those whose will is to fight that outcome? Bryn or Prinf, whose magics have become the focus of evolution for the planet's civilization? Perhaps Arisu, whose plants have refused to adapt my blood to advance their evolution more quickly?
Our magical teachings preach balance among the elements. We have as much respect for blood magic as any other, Baika replies.
Now explain to me how plant magic deserves the respect of mine, Jesus booms.
This is why others are evolving past you, Soraya speaks into the god's mind.
Insolence!
Jesus screams and then springs into action. When he leaps from the podium, his scrawny short legs and black skinny jeans are revealed, seeming unfit to even brace the hulking frame of his upper body. Nonetheless, they launch him high into the air, where he lifts his massive arms above his head. Surrounding his hands, the bloody rain coagulates and reshapes into an enormous crimson dragon slayer sword, which he swings downward, shifting his momentum in an arc towards Soraya. With a flick of the wrist, Soraya backhands the approaching blade, easily deflecting it. A second blade appears in Jesus' other hand and cuts toward her as well, only to be reflected the same by her other hand. In the small interim before the next attack, Soraya pushes Baika by the shoulder, gracefully catapulting her back towards the door just as Jesus enters a flurry of slashes for Soraya to block, one which constantly adds new swords that materialize in the air on all sides. Soon, Soraya is deflecting swords with both hands and feet faster than the eye can see, in a sphere surrounding her. After a few seconds of persistent onslaught focused solely on her, Soraya becomes confident that Jesus doesn't seem intent on going after Baika while she's distracted. His challenge seems to be a matter of pride against her specifically, or at least she's willing to gamble on that interpretation. More is added to Jesus' onslaught than what fails to meet the eye. Inside her body, he is constantly forcing a hack attempt on her bloodstream, which she has to continually counteract with her own blood spells. Between the inner and outer attacks, all of her concentration is occupied with defense, but Soraya remembers instinctively how the god reacted to challenges to his concentration before through psychic messaging. Coward, she beams into his mind as the first thing she can think of, and in the split second where he can't help but react, she uses a completely new magnetism spell of her own invention to take control of all the blood in the cathedral through its iron content. So this is what you fear, she then messages into his mind, upsetting him further.
Impossible! I've never given magnetism power over blood, he shouts as he realizes that he can no longer move his body.
Bryn Bryn has never been interested. I am, and I understand both magics better than you do. I more deserve your title than yourself.
Before Jesus has a chance to respond, all of the bloody raindrops and massive blades frozen in midair are redirected and shot through his body with railgun force. From all the countless cuts and slashes, an eruption of blood explodes in all directions from his giant torso.
Jesus Christ!
Baika calls out, worried that Soraya has gone and murdered the god.
I didn't kill him,
The stoic girl announces with her usual attentiveness to her friend's feelings, as the god crumples to the ground in a pool of gore.
I only sought to kill his pride.
As Soraya speaks and turns towards Baika, a disturbance slashes through the atmosphere in front of her so suddenly as to send her thinking into maximum overdrive. Baika's eyes shine blue and her body becomes relaxed as Soraya takes full possession over the girl's brain for additional RAM, perceiving in picoseconds the arc of a scythe towards her head and giving out her knees to enter a 90-degree limbo pose under a blade which would have chopped her in half. In the next half of a nanosecond, she is able to observe the figure being carried past her by its momentum. A black-clothed and black-colored skeleton with a matching scythe flies overhead, just before another figure comes hurtling down from directly above. Before Soraya can pick out more than a duster jacket on a seemingly male figure, the ground beneath her feet suddenly rises, rapidly closing the gap between herself and the attacker, whose balled-up hand finally crashes into her face with enormous strength, pounding her cratering down through the 10-foot pillar of earth which has been erected beneath her feet. Instantly, the earth surrounding her presses inwards, but she erects a psychic barrier in time to prevent herself from getting crushed. This can only be the work of Gologoth, the god of the earth. As he hangs in the air above his pillars, swirling his hands and squeezing all the earth around Soraya inward to add pressure, Baika recognizes her town's patron god.
How could you betray us?
She calls out. The last I saw of your temple, it was set aflame, the god hollers back. He is dressed like a typical 20th century miner, with a square jaw and a rough voice.
That was the work of the man you've joined,
Baika cries.
A man my pathetic followers were powerless to stop. I know what the winning team looks like,
Gologoth retorts.
There is no winning in Akita's scenario.
I move the earth so species can evolve in new scenarios, but I can think of no faster catalyst to a new evolution than a reroll on the universe. Don't you see how the potential for that future is even greater than what my powers can realize?
So you're just giving up?
Enough of this. A rasp creeps into Baika's ear, seeming to saturate the air. The god of death, Nibiblum, makes his presence apparent once more, as he hangs in the air beside the sphere of shifting earth which continues trying to press through Soraya's barrier. He raises his scythe in such a way that suggests he's about to make another lightning-fast clean cut straight through the diameter of the clusterfuck.
Soraya!
Baika hollers helplessly. Inside her barrier, Soraya finally comes to a difficult decision and uses the first new psychic spell which she had invented when she mastered the Jimbali technique, the mass replacement. She'd used it once before to defeat Eamesron Goyd, a spell which would swap out the same person as they appear in every currently congruent universe and place them all in the same new location in a subsequent universe. There hadn't been any consequences for using the spell last time, but this time, there isn't time to think. Soraya appears in the air beside Gologoth and lightspeed kicks him upside the head, blasting his body into Nibiblums with rail force as they both rip through the back wall of the cathedral and into the side of the mountain behind it. Baika rushes to Soraya's side, but Soraya bars her with her arm.
Baika, I have to tell you, I am not the same Soraya you were with before.
Baika gasps confused.
I swapped myself out between all of the dimensions which were the same in that moment, but there were an odd number. I don't know which, but one of them had to die. Probably followed by you and eventually many others in that dimension's future.
Baika cries and clings tightly to Soraya, arms around her neck.
I'm so sorry!
She hollers, not really completely processing the meaning of Soraya's words, but understanding at least that something of her had been lost. Soraya breaks her intensity for a moment to smile and soothe her friend's worries.
No doubt you are the same Baika I loved at home, she says, and embraces the girl.
The moment is interrupted as Baika's eyes go blue again, and Soraya begins counterattacking a flurry of earth spells while dodging super speed scythe slashes with her girlfriend cradled in tow. Unable to cast an earth magic spell against Soraya's firewall, Gologoth rushes in for an uppercut under one of Death's incoming slashes, but Soraya sees it coming from so far away that she simultaneously dodges the slash and kicks upward, scoring a straight hit on the earth god's flat jaw and blasting him up through the dome ceiling of the cathedral. Soon after, Soraya takes to the air for a dodge, and then kicks off of the falling crucifix statue from above, launching herself in pursuit of Gologoth. Before he can correct his momentum, she's kicking him again, and this time his face collides with that of the mountain and grinds against it at sonic speed all the way down to the base, which is also the point on his neck at which his head is ground to. I am sorry, Soraya says as she rapidly floats herself and the girl cradle in her arms toward the ground, watching the body to be sure it doesn't animate.
It's okay,
Baika responds, shaking at the sight of a god she once respected now ground to dust. Earth magic, for now, is inoperable. In the next instant, Baika's eyes go blue once more, but only at the very same time that a grotesque crunch reaches Soraya's ears, and a glint of silver enters her view from the rough edge of a broken sword just barely peeking blood-soaked out of Baika's gut. Her eyes can only go wide with shock in time before Akita's foot slams into her, pounding her straight into the mountain face. Baika spits up blood and starts to lose consciousness as she hears laughter from over her shoulder. When Akita rips his broken blade back out of the blonde's back, her body limply plummets to the ground, rolling a bit down the mountain slope. Whoopsie! Didn't mean to drop my toy, Akita howls, laughing as he swings the blood from his blade. He lands by Baika's bleeding side, and then lifts the girl up by the hair and holds his blade to her neck just in time to halt Soraya's hand before it courses through his own. Thought so, he gloats, and then slams the butt of his blade into Soraya's face, whipping her through the air and sending her to the ground, where his foot soon follows, stomping on her head and planting it into the dirt. Then, as her legs twist upward trying to kick at his face, he grabs her by the ankles, about faces, twisting her body around, and then pulls her up and slams her back down, face first on the mountainside. Before Akita can deal a killing blow and plunge his blade through the girl's heart, however, she pushes herself up with her palms, kicks off the ground, and flips up to the top of a tree. Then, immediately, she jumps and does a backflip, dodging over Nibiblim's scythe once more. Akita and his blade are already rocketing toward her at the end of her arc, but she manages to grab onto his wrist, using his forward momentum to propel herself over him in a handspring, then kicking off the back of his head, twirling around in the air, and firing a wind gun blast back at him from the tip of her finger. Akita catches the first bullet of hyper-compressed air in his teeth, but sees the others coming in time to teleport away. Thanks for teaching me that trick, he says, lifting the bleeding Baika by the hair once more after appearing beside her. I like this one too, he says, and Baika's eyes start to shine blue again as he laughs. That's when Soraya's hand enters his face so hard and fast that it crushes the structure of it, capsizing the skull inwards until the brain is nearly mush, and then he disappears into the distance faster than the splitting air can make a sound. Absolute fool! She screams and magnifies the sound waves to pulse over the atmosphere to wherever his body is currently losing speed. You think this is a Beowulf cluster? She isn't even psychic, you fucking moron! This is what it means to understand someone! This is what it means to love! You'll never ever have it! Tears explode from Soraya's eyes as she howls into the air, lifting and clutching close the bloodied unconscious body of her lover. Just before Nibiblim's scythe can make another go at her, Soraya blasts off in flight to bring her bloodied companion back to the castle. And that's it. That's it for the Volume 3 preview. I realize this preview is almost as long as the entire first volume of the book, but it pretty much represents a fifth or a sixth, maybe, of Volume 3. So yeah, it's going to be much longer than the first two, if you can't tell by just the sheer amount that the story is now being sort of decompressed. We have a lot of exposition, a lot of new characters, a lot of new concepts going on in this book. So yeah, it's the big Esper War. Get hyped to watch what's going to happen. The next part, when it comes back, I'll probably do the rest of the book as just one book and just release it all at once. So it's not going to be like more parts like this. This is just a preview. But again, I will be completing the book 1 and 2 physical copy before I publish Volume 3. And just to get you hype, the next chapter is going to be a long one focused on Exia, bringing her back into the story. So if you wanted something to look forward to for Volume 3, Exia's return will be the very beginning of that, of the next chapter. But yeah, so that's all I'm going to say about the rest of Volume 3. I don't want to spoil anything. I'm really excited to get back to writing it because of the fact that so much of the ideas that are in Volume 3, which, again, I came up with back when I wrote Volume 1, are things that will, I think, be even more interesting to a lot of audience members in light of recent changes in my life. So, if the story so far isn't already like that. But, yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you will contribute to the book. I'll, of course, make another video as soon as the physical copy is actually for sale. Again, if you are somebody who made art for the book, send me an email to make sure that I pay you. You know, I'm going to try to make sure I get everybody, but like it's a lot of fucking people and my emails are very chaotic. I did not organize my emails well. So Yeah, make sure you message me. And that's all.